November 14, 1942, 3:47 a.m. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The jungle breathed with moisture as Marine Corporal James Mitchell crouched in a foxhole, his fingers wrapped around the grip of a Colt M1911 pistol. 40 yards away, Japanese infantrymen moved through the darkness, their voices carrying across the humid air in mocking laughter. They had heard stories about the American sidearm. Heavy, slow, only 7 rounds. A relic, they said, compared to the swift Nambu Type 14 they carried. For years after the war, military historians would write that pistols played a minor role in the Pacific theater, that rifles and machine guns decided battles. But in the rain-soaked nights of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, and Okinawa, a different story unfolded, a story written in .45 caliber rounds that stopped men in their tracks.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Behind the official accounts lies a truth carved into the memories of those who fought hand-to-hand in the darkness. The Colt 45 was not just a weapon. It was a lifeline when the enemy came too close to use a rifle. And the Japanese soldiers who mocked it in training camps learned a brutal lesson in the jungles and caves of the Pacific. The numbers tell a stark reality. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States military issued over 1.9 million M1911 pistols to its forces. In the Pacific theater alone, more than 400,000 of these weapons saw combat. Marine raiders, Navy corpsmen, Army officers, tank crews, and pilots all carried the Colt on their hips. It became so ubiquitous that Japanese intelligence officers began referring to it in captured documents as the stopping pistol, a grudging acknowledgement of its devastating close-range power. One Marine veteran, Sergeant Robert Chen, remembered his first encounter with enemy ridicule. "We captured a Japanese position on Tulagi in August '42, found a diary on one of the bodies. Our translator read it to us. The guy had written about American pistols, calling them clumsy thundersticks that could not match the speed of Nippon steel. He was dead 3 pages later, shot twice in the chest by a .45 during a night raid." To understand why this matters, one must grasp the nature of Pacific combat. Unlike the open fields of Europe, the Pacific War was fought at suffocating proximity. Jungles so dense that visibility dropped to 10 feet. Coral caves where men crawled through darkness with knives and pistols. Beach assaults where officers waded ashore coordinating troops while under fire. In these conditions, a rifle's range meant nothing. What mattered was stopping power at arm's length. The Colt M1911 delivered that power with unmatched authority. Its .45 ACP round weighed 230 grains, traveling at 830 feet per second. When it struck human tissue, it created a massive temporary wound cavity, often rendering an opponent combat ineffective with a single hit. Japanese soldiers, many weighing less than 140 pounds, were particularly vulnerable to its impact. Marines landing on Guadalcanal in the early morning light witnessed something that would become routine. As they pushed inland, Navy corpsmen moved among the wounded, pistols drawn. These medics couldn't carry rifles. Their hands were needed for bandages and morphine. But when Japanese soldiers emerged from the jungle to target the vulnerable medics, the Colt became their only defense. Corpsman William Torres later described the weight of that responsibility. "You're kneeling over a Marine with his guts hanging out, and you hear rustling in the bamboo. You've got seconds. The .45 doesn't miss at that range, and it doesn't fail to stop what it hits."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Children in American factory towns would see their fathers and brothers depart for the Pacific with these pistols holstered at their sides. The weapon became a symbol, appearing in newsreels and propaganda posters. But the families didn't know what their men learned in the dark, that the Colt's 8-pound weight, which seemed cumbersome on a parade ground, provided stability when your hands shook with fear. That its 7-round magazine, mocked by Japanese troops carrying 8-round Nambus, meant each bullet was built to end a fight, not continue it. When the Empire of Japan launched its assault on December 7, 1941, the United States Marine Corps and Army found themselves desperately under-equipped for jungle warfare. The standard-issue M1 Garand rifle was magnificent in open terrain, but became a liability in close quarters. At 43 inches long and weighing nearly 10 pounds, it was unwieldy in dense vegetation. Submachine guns were scarce. For thousands of American servicemen, their survival depended on what hung at their hip. The Colt M1911 had been adopted in 1911, 30 years before Pearl Harbor, designed after brutal lessons learned in the Philippine-American War. In those campaigns, American soldiers faced moral warriors who, under the influence of drugs and religious fervor, continued fighting even after being shot multiple times with .38 caliber revolvers. The Army needed a pistol that would stop a man with one shot. John Browning's design achieved that with ruthless efficiency. By the time Japanese forces swept across the Pacific in early 1942, the Colt had become standard issue, but its reputation was mixed. Peacetime soldiers complained about its recoil. Target shooters preferred the precision of smaller calibers. Critics argued it was outdated compared to newer European designs. The Japanese military intelligence had absorbed these criticisms, including them in training materials that portrayed American small arms as inferior to Japanese equipment. One captured Japanese training manual from 1941 described American pistol doctrine with barely concealed contempt. The enemy officer carries a large pistol of ancient design. It is slow to reload and punishing to fire. Art Type 14 Nambu provides superior rate of fire and 8-round capacity. In close combat, speed and volume triumph over crude power. This assessment would prove catastrophically wrong, but in the early months of 1942, Japanese confidence seemed justified by their string of victories. The reality American forces faced was desperate. By March 1942, the Philippines had fallen. Wake Island was lost. Thousands of American and Filipino troops marched into captivity on the Bataan Death March. In those dark months, survival often came down to individual encounters in the jungle. Officers who had practiced marksmanship on peaceful rifle ranges now found themselves in hand-to-hand struggles where a pistol was the difference between life and death. Lieutenant Richard Kowalski, a platoon commander with the 1st Marine Division, kept a detailed diary that survived the war. His entry from August 8, 1942, the second day of the Guadalcanal invasion, describes what many experienced but few recorded. Night came fast. The Japanese counterattacked through our lines. In the confusion, I got separated from my rifle. 3 of them came at me through the palms. The first one was smiling. Actually smiling. He had a pistol too, looked like a Nambu. We both fired. His round went past my ear. I felt the air move. Mine hit him center mass. He went down like someone cut his strings. The other 2 hesitated. That hesitation cost them. 7 rounds, 3 men. I was shaking so bad afterward I couldn't reload for 5 minutes.
What Kowalski didn't know was that his experience was being replicated across the island. In aid stations, sentries armed with M1911s held off probing attacks. In command posts, staff officers who hadn't fired a weapon in anger since training found themselves defending their positions with pistols as Japanese infiltrators sought to decapitate American leadership. Tank crews, crawling from damaged vehicles, used their .45s to fight their way back to friendly lines. The Colt's design proved ideal for these conditions. Unlike many pistols, it functioned reliably despite mud, sand, and salt water. Its heavy slide and simple blowback mechanism meant it rarely jammed. When a Marine crawled through coral and muck, his rifle might clog, but his pistol still fired. Maintenance was minimal. A quick wipe-down and occasional oiling kept it operational for months. One often overlooked detail shaped countless encounters. The .45 ACP round was subsonic, meaning it didn't break the sound barrier. In the cacophony of jungle combat, this created an acoustic shadow. A Marine firing a Colt produced a deep boom that didn't travel as far as the supersonic crack of a rifle. In night fighting, this meant Japanese forces often couldn't pinpoint the source of the fire. Confusion and darkness meant survival. Navy fighter pilots carried a variation called the M1911A1 in shoulder holsters. If shot down over enemy-held islands, the pistol became their only weapon for evading capture. Lieutenant Edward Harrison, flying off the USS Enterprise in October 1943, was forced to bail out over Bougainville in October 1943. He spent 11 days behind enemy lines before reaching friendly forces. His debriefing report, preserved in naval archives, describes using his .45 to kill a Japanese patrol soldier who discovered his hiding spot. Quote, "Didn't have a choice. He was 5 feet away. The round took him off his feet. The sound brought more of them, but by then I was running. That pistol saved my life twice more before I made it to the coast." End quote. These accounts rarely made it into newspapers. The public wanted stories of heroic charges and daring air raids, not desperate struggles in the dark where men killed each other at conversational distance. But for the servicemen who fought in the Pacific, these moments defined the war. The Colt 45 was there for all of them.
By September 1942, enough reports had filtered back to headquarters that Marine Corps leadership began formal documentation of pistol effectiveness in jungle combat. What they discovered contradicted decades of military doctrine that treated sidearms as weapons of last resort, barely more useful than bayonets. In the Pacific, pistols were proving to be essential frontline weapons. The brutal mathematics of close-quarters combat told the story. In fighting on Guadalcanal, medical officers estimated that nearly 30% of all Japanese casualties in night actions were inflicted by pistol fire. This wasn't because Americans preferred their sidearms, but because the jungle forced them to fight at ranges where rifles couldn't be brought to bear. When a Japanese soldier burst from vegetation 3 feet away, there wasn't time to shoulder a rifle. The Colt, already in hand, settled the matter. Captured Japanese soldiers began corroborating what American forces witnessed firsthand. Under interrogation, a sergeant from the 38th Division admitted that his unit had been warned about the American pistol after their first engagement. "We were told not to underestimate the heavy pistol. Our officers said it was like being hit by a small cannon. Men did not survive it the way they survived rifle wounds. We learned to fear the sound of it." This fear had a practical basis. The .45 ACP round created wounds that battlefield medicine of the era struggled to address. The massive tissue damage and shock meant soldiers hit center mass rarely remained combat effective, even if they initially survived. Japanese medical officers, working with limited supplies and training, found these wounds particularly difficult to treat. An American soldier shot with a 6.5mm Nambu round might return to action. A Japanese soldier hit with a .45 rarely did. The autumn of 1942 brought the naval Battle of Guadalcanal, a series of savage engagements that left both sides bloodied. Ashore, Marines clung to Henderson Field while Japanese forces launched repeated night attacks to reclaim it. In these battles, the Colt proved its worth again and again in circumstances its designers never imagined.
Sergeant Michael Torres held a section of the perimeter on the night of November 13th when a Japanese banzai charge struck his position. His after-action report, filed 3 days later, describes the chaos with clinical precision. "They came in waves, screaming. My barman went down in the first seconds. I fired my carbine until the magazine was empty, then pulled my .45. At that point, they were in the foxhole. I killed 4 men in maybe 10 seconds. point blank. The pistol never jammed, never failed. When it was over, my hand was so torn up from the recoil and grip that I couldn't feel my fingers. But I was alive. Torres wasn't alone. Across the Marine perimeter, similar scenes played out. Officers, NCOs, and specialists, armed with pistols, found themselves in lethal embraces with enemy soldiers who had broken through the lines. The Colt's design advantage became apparent. Its grip safety and thumb safety meant it wouldn't fire if dropped or fumbled. But when held properly, it fired with mechanical certainty. In the confusion of hand-to-hand combat, these safety features prevented accidental discharges while ensuring intentional ones never failed. A detail often lost in broader histories. Navy corpsmen on Guadalcanal began carrying 2 pistols, one in a hip holster and a backup tucked into their medical bags. Senior Chief Hospital Corpsman Daniel O'Brien explained the practice in a letter home that his family preserved. "We can't carry rifles because we need both hands free to work on the wounded. But the Japanese target us specifically. They know killing a corpsman means the Marines won't get patched up. So we carry the 45s. I've used mine 3 times. Each time I was leaning over a Marine trying to stop bleeding when a Japanese soldier came at us. There's no aiming. You just point and pull the trigger. The stopping power is the only reason I'm still writing to you." This practice spread throughout the Pacific Theater. Corpsmen, by regulation non-combatants, became some of the most proficient pistol shooters in the military out of sheer necessity. They trained constantly, knowing their weapon handling had to be instinctive. When your attention is on a sucking chest wound, you can't afford to fumble with your sidearm.
The geography of the Pacific Theater shaped how the Colt was used. Unlike Europe, where armies maneuvered across relatively open terrain, the Pacific campaigns were fought across thousands of islands, each presenting unique challenges. Coral atolls with no cover except shell holes, volcanic islands with cave systems, jungle-covered mountains where visibility measured in yards, not miles. On these islands, the traditional infantry doctrine of fire and maneuver broke down. Units became separated, communication failed in the dense vegetation. Small groups of men fought isolated battles, often not knowing if friendly forces were 20 yards or 2 miles away. In these conditions, a pistol wasn't a secondary weapon. It was often the primary means of survival. Tank crews discovered this on Tarawa in November 1943. The tiny atoll offered no room for armor to maneuver. Tanks bogged down in shell holes or were disabled by Japanese anti-tank guns hidden in bunkers. When crews bailed out, they faced Japanese infantry in terrain that negated every advantage of mechanized warfare. Sergeant Anthony Russo, a Sherman tank commander, described abandoning his burning vehicle under fire. "We got hit by something big, probably a 37 millimeter. The inside was an inferno. We scrambled out, and immediately there were Japanese soldiers coming at us. No room to run, nowhere to hide. My whole crew had 45s. We formed a circle and fought them off until another tank could cover us. My loader, Jackson, killed 3 men with 5 shots. At that range, you don't miss." The spring of 1943 brought new campaigns and harder lessons. As American forces moved north through the Solomon Islands chain, Japanese defenders refined their tactics. They had learned from Guadalcanal's failures. Now they built elaborate cave systems connected by tunnels that allowed rapid movement beneath American positions. Surface fighting gave way to subterranean warfare, where battles were fought in absolute darkness with flashlights and pistols. On New Georgia Island in July 1943, Army troops from the 43rd Infantry Division encountered this new reality. Japanese forces had carved networks into volcanic rock, creating fortified positions that artillery couldn't touch. Flamethrowers could seal entrances, but enemy soldiers simply moved through connecting passages to emerge elsewhere. The only solution was to go in after them. Private First Class Leonard Watts volunteered for tunnel duty on July 15th. His account, recorded by Army historians after the war, describes a world most soldiers never saw. "They sent us in 6 men at a time. You couldn't take a rifle,
Too long, too awkward. We went in with pistols, flashlights, and grenades. The tunnel was maybe 4 feet high. You crawled on your belly through mud and water. Sometimes you heard them moving ahead of you. Sometimes you just felt it. When you met them, it was gun against gun at 3 feet. The 45 ACP saved my life 4 times in those tunnels. I put 13 men down before we cleared that system. Tunnel fighting revealed the Colt's supreme advantage in confined spaces. The Japanese non-boot Type 14, with its longer barrel and toggled lock action, was prone to jamming when covered in mud. The Colt's simple design and shorter profile made it ideal for operating in cramped darkness. More critically, its stopping power meant fights ended quickly. In a tunnel where there was no retreat and no room to maneuver, the first soldier to land an effective shot survived. The 45 ACP rarely required a second shot.
Medical data from these campaigns reinforced what frontline troops already knew. Field hospitals treating both American and Japanese wounded documented the difference between calibers. Dr. Howard Chen, a battalion surgeon with the 37th Infantry Division, kept meticulous records that contradicted pre-war assumptions about pistol effectiveness. The standard teaching was that pistols were ineffective beyond 10 yards and only marginally effective closer. What we saw proved otherwise. Japanese soldiers hit by .45 rounds sustained catastrophic tissue damage even from peripheral hits. A round that struck the shoulder could fracture the collarbone and create shock sufficient to incapacitate. The hydrostatic shock from center mass hits was devastating. I treated hundreds of gunshot wounds during the war. The .45 created wounds unlike any other small arm we carried. By autumn 1943, Japanese military leadership began circulating revised tactical guidance. Captured documents from the 51st Division, destroyed on Bougainville, included a section titled Countering American Pistol Doctrine. The text acknowledged what Japanese troops had learned through bitter experience. The enemy heavy pistol has proven more formidable than initial assessments suggested. Its large caliber creates wounds that our medical facilities cannot effectively treat. In close combat, soldiers armed with this weapon possess a decisive advantage. When engaging American officers and specialists, maintain distance whenever possible. This represented a profound shift. The weapon they had mocked in 1941 was now something Japanese commanders specifically warned against. The psychological impact extended beyond simple fear. American possession of the Colt became a status symbol that enemy forces recognized. Officers and NCOs carried them openly, and Japanese snipers began targeting pistol-carrying personnel, assuming they were leaders worth killing. The invasion of Tarawa Atoll in November 1943 demonstrated the Colt's value in amphibious operations. The landing beaches were disasters of planning and execution. Tides came in lower than predicted. Landing craft hung up on coral reefs hundreds of yards from shore. Marines waded through chest-deep water under withering fire, rifles held overhead to keep them dry. But pistols, holstered at the waist, were already submerged. When Second Lieutenant Brandon Mitchell reached the seawall, his M1 Garand had been underwater for 10 minutes. He didn't trust it to fire. He drew his Colt, shook the water from the barrel, and racked the slide. The pistol functioned perfectly. His combat report, filed aboard ship 3 days later, describes the next 6 hours. We were pinned under the seawall. Japanese machine guns had us zeroed. Anyone who stood up died. We had to go over eventually or die on the beach. When we went, it was pistols and grenades. No room for rifle work. The Japanese were in pillboxes 5 to 10 feet from the wall. We'd pop up, put rounds through the firing slits, drop back down. The 45 was the only weapon that made sense. My entire platoon that survived the landing carried pistols until we could clear enough space to retrieve our rifles from the dead. Tarawa also revealed the weapon's versatility in unexpected ways. Navy underwater demolition teams, the predecessors of modern SEALs, used Colt pistols during reconnaissance swims. They would approach enemy beaches at night, survey obstacles, and retreat before dawn. If detected, they fought their way out with waterproofed .45s that fired reliably even after full saltwater immersion. Chief Petty Officer Richard Nakamura described this practice with professional admiration. We'd wrap the pistols in oilcloth, but that only worked so far. Saltwater got everywhere. After a swim, we'd surface, unwrap the weapon, clear the chamber, and it fired. Every time. I never saw one fail. The design was foolproof. As 1944 opened, American forces prepared for the Central Pacific Drive, an island-hopping campaign that would carry them from the Marshalls through the Marianas to the Philippines. Each landing brought innovations in amphibious doctrine, but one constant remained. Officers, corpsmen, radiomen, and specialists all carried the Colt M1911 as their primary weapon. It had transcended its original role as a sidearm to become an essential tool of Pacific warfare. The battle for Saipan in June 1944 brought the war to Japan's doorstep. The island held 30,000 Japanese defenders and tens of thousands of civilians who had been told Americans would torture and kill them. The result was a campaign of horrifying intensity, where combat blurred into massacre, as Japanese soldiers and civilians alike chose death over surrender.
Captain Thomas Bradford commanded a rifle company during the push inland from the beaches. His unit encountered what would become routine in the Marianas: organized banzai charges designed to overwhelm American positions through sheer numbers and fanatical aggression. On the night of July 7th, over 3,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians, armed with whatever weapons they could find, launched the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War. Bradford's after-action report describes a defensive line that ceased to exist within minutes. They came in a human wave, no tactics, no fire and maneuver, just thousands of people running at us screaming. We fired everything we had, machine guns, rifles, grenades, but there were too many. They got into our positions. It became hand-to-hand in seconds. I emptied my rifle into the mass, then drew my .45. For the next 20 minutes, I fought with the pistol exclusively. I have no idea how many rounds I fired. We were passing magazines between anyone who had them. The only thing that stopped them was hitting them hard enough that they couldn't keep coming. The .45 did that. Medical personnel on Saipan faced similar horrors. Japanese forces specifically targeted aid stations, knowing that destroying American medical capability would demoralize units and reduce combat effectiveness. Hospital corpsman Vincent Torres defended an aid station on July 8th alongside 2 other medics. Between them, they had 3 M1911 pistols and limited ammunition. They held the position for 6 hours against repeated attacks, protecting 27 wounded Marines who couldn't be evacuated. Torres killed 9 attackers himself before reinforcements arrived. His Medal of Honor citation makes no mention of his weapon, but his personal account, given to family members, credits the Colt with making survival possible. "I'm not a soldier. I'm a medic. But when someone comes at you with a bayonet and you've got wounded men behind you, you do what you have to do." The pistol was instinctive. Point and shoot. It stopped them every time.
The fighting in the Marianas also demonstrated the weapon's durability under sustained use. Marines and soldiers who fought through weeks of continuous combat reported pistols that fired thousands of rounds with minimal maintenance. The Colt's design tolerated abuse that would disable more complex weapons. Sergeant Raymond Foster carried the same M1911 from Saipan through Tinian and Guam, firing an estimated 800 rounds in combat. His weapon never jammed, never misfired, never failed. After the war, he donated it to a museum with a note: "This pistol saved my life more times than I can count. It deserves better than a closet." By autumn 1944, the Philippines beckoned. General Douglas MacArthur had promised to return, and American forces prepared for the largest amphibious operation in the Pacific theater. The invasion of Leyte in October brought together hundreds of thousands of American troops against a Japanese garrison that had vowed to fight to the last man. The resulting campaign sprawled across multiple islands and lasted months, producing some of the most savage fighting of the war. Jungle combat in the Philippines surpassed even Guadalcanal in brutality. Japanese forces, no longer able to challenge American naval and air superiority, resorted to guerrilla tactics. They ambushed supply columns, infiltrated American lines at night, and fought from prepared positions that had to be taken one bunker at a time. In this environment, the Colt remained indispensable. First Lieutenant Daniel Reeves led a reconnaissance patrol on Leyte in November 1944. His mission was to identify Japanese positions ahead of a planned offensive. The patrol encountered an enemy company moving through the same jungle corridor. Reeves' account describes combat at ranges measured in feet. "We practically walked into each other, no warning, no preparation. Both sides just started firing. I had my carbine but couldn't get it up in time. The Japanese soldier in front of me was maybe 6 feet away with his rifle halfway to his shoulder. I drew my .45 and shot him twice. He went down. Then I shot the man behind him and the one behind him. My entire patrol was doing the same thing. It was chaos. We fought through them and kept moving. The .45 was the only reason any of us made it out." Tank crews fighting in the Philippines discovered new vulnerabilities. Japanese forces developed sophisticated tank hunting tactics, using magnetic mines, satchel charges, and suicidal attacks to disable American armor. When a tank was immobilized, its crew became targets for infantry armed with grenades and small arms. The Colt provided last-ditch defense when crews had to abandon their vehicles. Staff Sergeant Michael Yoshida commanded a Sherman tank that struck a mine near Ormoc in December 1944. His crew bailed out under fire, their tank burning behind them. Yoshida's combat report describes fighting their way to friendly lines. "We ran, no other choice, but they were everywhere. We could not run them, so we had to fight. 5 of us with pistols against maybe 20 of them. We formed a circle and moved together, firing at anything that moved. I went through 3 magazines. By the time we reached our lines, I'd killed 4 men and wounded at least 2 more. My gunner, Kowalski, got hit but kept fighting. He used his .45 one-handed while I tried to stop the bleeding. We made it because we had weapons that worked and hit hard enough to make them cautious." The Battle for Manila in February 1945 brought urban combat to the Pacific theater on a scale previously unseen. Japanese naval forces, trapped in the city, fought building to building, room to room. American soldiers and Marines cleared the city in brutal close-quarters battles where rifles were too cumbersome and submachine guns too scarce. The Colt M1911 became the weapon of choice for room clearing. Private First Class Anthony Diaz, fighting with the 37th Infantry Division, described entering a building held by Japanese Marines. "You kick in the door and go in fast, no time to think. The first room had 3 of them. I shot the first one as I came through the door. The second one came at me with a sword. I shot him twice. The third tried to hide behind furniture. I put 2 rounds through the couch and he stopped moving. We cleared 4 floors like that. Every room was a new fight. The .45 never let me down. Point it, pull the trigger, move to the next room." Urban fighting in Manila lasted a month and left the city in ruins. Over 100,000 civilians died, caught between Japanese atrocities and American artillery. For the soldiers doing the room clearing, survival depended on instinct and reliable weapons. The Colt provided both. Its heavy recoil, often criticized in training, became an asset. Soldiers could feel when the weapon fired, maintaining awareness even in the confusion and noise of urban combat. As spring 1945 arrived, American forces prepared for the final stepping stone before Japan itself, Okinawa. The island lay just 400 miles from the Japanese home islands and would serve as the staging ground for the planned invasion. Japanese defenders numbered over 100,000 troops, supported by thousands of Okinawan conscripts. They had months to prepare elaborate defenses. The result was the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War. The battle for Okinawa began on April 1, 1945, and lasted until June. American casualties exceeded 50,000, including over 12,000 dead. Japanese casualties approached 100,000 combat deaths. In this meat grinder, every weapon mattered. The Colt M1911 proved its worth one final time in the cave systems that honeycombed the island's southern highlands. Corporal James Nakamura, fighting with the 6th Marine Division, specialized in cave warfare. His unit developed techniques for clearing the underground fortifications that had stymied earlier assaults. The tactics were simple. Small teams of men armed with pistols, grenades, and flamethrowers would enter caves and fight through them systematically. Nakamura's account describes work that resembled urban combat fought in absolute darkness. You go in not knowing what's ahead. Sometimes the caves opened into large chambers. Sometimes they narrowed to crawl spaces. We carried the .45 because it worked everywhere. In the tight spaces, you'd be face to face with them. No aiming, just pointing. The muzzle flash blinded you, but you knew if you hit them because they stopped. I cleared 17 caves on Okinawa, used my pistol in 12 of them.
The close proximity of combat created psychological effects that shaped behavior long after the fighting ended. Veterans of Okinawa reported hypervigilance and startle responses that lasted decades. Many credited their survival to split-second reactions enabled by thoroughly trained pistol handling. The weapon had become an extension of their bodies, requiring no conscious thought to employ.
By June 1945, Okinawa was secured, and American forces prepared for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan itself. The Colt M1911 would have played a crucial role in that campaign, arming the millions of troops expected to participate. But the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August brought Japanese surrender, rendering the invasion unnecessary. When peace came, over 400,000 Colt M1911s had seen combat in the Pacific Theater. They had served in every campaign from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, carried by men of every rank and specialty. The weapon that Japanese forces had mocked in 1941 had proven to be one of the most reliable and effective small arms of the war. Veterans brought their memories home, and many brought their pistols as well. Unlike rifles, which were typically turned in at war's end, officers who had purchased their own M1911s were allowed to keep them. These weapons became treasured mementos, passed down through families, each one carrying stories its owner often couldn't fully articulate. Sergeant Robert Chen, who had read the captured diary mocking American pistols on Tulagi, kept his Colt for 50 years. Shortly before his death in 1994, he told his grandson about the weapon. People who weren't there don't understand what it meant. It wasn't just a gun. It was the thing between you and going home in a box. I trusted it more than I trusted anything or anyone in that war. It never failed me, not once. The official histories of the Pacific War focus on naval battles, air campaigns, and island invasions. They discuss strategy, logistics, and grand maneuvers. But for hundreds of thousands of American servicemen, the war was fought at arm's length, against enemies who came at them through darkness and jungle. In those moments, doctrine and strategy meant nothing. What mattered was the weapon in your hand. The Colt M1911 provided certainty when everything else was chaos. Its design, forged from lessons learned fighting insurgents in the Philippines 40 years earlier, proved ideally suited for the jungle warfare that dominated the Pacific. Its stopping power, mocked by an enemy who valued speed and capacity, became the standard against which all other pistols were measured. Japanese forces learned this lesson through casualties that mounted with each campaign.
Their tactical documents evolved from contempt to respect to outright fear. By 1945, Japanese soldiers knew that engaging an American carrying the heavy pistol was a death sentence at close range. That knowledge, born from thousands of encounters across dozens of islands, was paid for in blood. The Colt served American forces for decades after World War II, seeing combat in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. But it was in the Pacific theater where its legend was forged. In tunnels beneath volcanic islands, in jungle clearings where visibility measured in feet, in the ruins of Manila and the caves of Okinawa, the pistol proved what its designers had intended. It stopped men with one shot. For the veterans who carried it, the Colt M1911 was more than a weapon. It was a promise kept. When rifles jammed and distance closed to nothing, when darkness fell and enemies came from all directions, the pistol remained. Heavy, reliable, and utterly decisive. 7 rounds that meant the difference between life and death. The young Marine corporal who crouched in a foxhole on Guadalcanal in November 1942, listening the Japanese soldiers mock American weapons, learned what thousands of others would learn in the years that followed. The laughter stopped when the shooting started. And when the shooting started at close range in the Pacific War, the Colt 45 had the final word.